Over 20 years from the Chapel of the Hidden Cross between 1952 and 1972, a secluded clerical compound in northern New Mexico quietly lost 26 ordained men. No public reports, no parish alerts. Each disappearance processed internally, with local authorities rarely informed. The institution maintained a singular explanation: voluntary departures. But archived letters, undisclosed travel logs, and internal memoranda reveal a pattern too structured to be coincidental. The facility's remote design and administrative autonomy allowed for full discretion. Public records list all 26 as having relocated by choice. Not one was ever found again. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross, nestled along a closed-access road near the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, operated under the Order of St. Castulus, a lesser-known Roman clerical group focused on seclusion and doctrinal instruction. Officially a retreat and disciplinary rehabilitation center, the chapel maintained total seclusion from the local population. Its reputation, even among regional clergy, was one of serene rigor, a place where priests could reflect, restructure, and, if necessary, begin anew in distant missions. The chapel published annual bulletins featuring hand-illustrated psalms and grainy photographs of seminarians in solemn procession. No scandal ever touched its name. Chapter 1, Part 1 coming next. Ready? In internal files preserved at the Archdiocesan Repository in Albuquerque, a collection marked SCC 52 through SCC 73 shows a steady rotation of assigned personnel to the Chapel of the Hidden Cross over 2 decades. Names are recorded in tightly spaced typeface, each with arrival and departure dates. For nearly all, the term departure is accompanied by the abbreviation TRANS, denoting transfer. No receiving institution is listed for 26 of them. The registry notes only file closed. Father Julian Corbett, who briefly served as the diocesan liaison to St. Castulus operations in the mid-1960s, kept a series of annotated calendars. Several of these include notations beside key names marked with red pencil: no follow-up, no return, pending but closed. On a page from March 1966, one name is circled twice with the words silent file. Corbett's own role was ceremonial, but his annotations suggest discomfort with the volume of unexplained terminations from that single location. He was reassigned to Arizona in early 1967. A former procurement officer, who worked with regional clerical accounts, recalled in a 1984 deposition that the Chapel of the Hidden Cross had fewer purchase orders than expected for an institution housing between 15 and 30 men. Deliveries included altar wine, vestments, and modest food shipments, but rarely showed requests for personal effects, medical care, or travel documents. According to him, most clerical sites required routine material turnover due to reassignment logistics. That place, he said, ran like it never expected movement. Architectural plans obtained from the New Mexico Office of Historical Records confirm the chapel's initial design included separate quarters for up to 40 men, divided into narrow cells branching from a central corridor. The outer buildings, including the clerical office, the refectory, and the record annex, were reinforced with adobe and stone. Unlike many religious facilities from the same era, it lacked a guest wing or hospitality areas. Site maps include detailed specifications for bell tower access, subterranean storage, and cloistered garden routes, but no external-facing signage. The structure was intended for permanent enclosure. By 1957, internal correspondence between diocesan officials references the ongoing administrative burden of unique departures from SCC. One memo, dated August of that year, mentions a growing reluctance among regional clergy to accept post-retreat assignments from the chapel. According to the note, priests sent to the site rarely maintain future contact and, in nearly all cases, decline future correspondence. No directive followed, and the matter appears unresolved. The chapel itself rarely appeared in regional directories. A 1961 survey of institutional holdings across the state omits the Chapel of the Hidden Cross entirely. It is absent from public church bulletins, not listed in regional diocesan newsletters, and does not appear in any published annuals after 1954. The only known external references are occasional credits in donation logs, usually marked by anonymous benefactors or redirected trust payments. One of the few surviving first-hand accounts of the chapel's operation came from a grounds technician who worked part-time maintaining its outer property line during dry seasons. Employed between 1963 and 1969 through a local contractor, he later stated that deliveries to the facility were always met at the gate and that nobody spoke unless spoken to. His route involved clearing brush along a 5-mile fence perimeter. He said he never once saw anyone enter or exit the main chapel building and that the upper windows were always closed, even in heat. Seminary records from the Order of St. Castulus show routine placements for recent graduates at the chapel during the 1950s and early 1960s. Most were assigned on a provisional basis for periods ranging from 6 to 18 months. Beyond that window, documentation ends. While other Castellan sites maintain full clerical histories, complete with evaluations, photographs, and eventual reassignment letters, the Hidden Cross files feature only introductory forms and a final single-page record stating the individual's status as closed by discretion of superior. In 1968, an internal audit requested by the Office of Clerical Oversight was quietly cancelled after 2 weeks. The lead reviewer, according to correspondence discovered decades later, noted in an early summary that the site does not conform to standard operational transparency and that no clear authority structure is visible on site. The cancellation letter was unsigned and filed under a different heading. No follow-up audit was scheduled. Aerial surveys from the late 1960s show that the chapel's boundaries expanded slightly during that period. Additions included a second wall encircling the property, which previous maps do not include. No building permits or land use documents account for the new enclosure. The wall, composed of hand-cut stone, reached an average height of 10 feet and formed a complete circuit with a single locked gate facing a disused trail. Satellite imagery confirms that this outer barrier remained intact through the mid-1980s. Despite 26 priests formally logged as having passed through its doors without further trace, the chapel continued receiving new placements into the early 1970s. Seminary schedules show young clerics assigned to SCC facility without specifying location. Most were recorded as having arrived in spring or fall rotations, but few had departure records. Local counties did not maintain missing persons registries for religious institutions at the time. During a routine land reassessment in 1974, state officials arrived unannounced to conduct a boundary inspection. Their presence was not met with cooperation. According to the reassessment form, officials were told all external matters were under religious jurisdiction and were denied access to central grounds. They recorded only visible outbuildings, noted minimal structural changes since prior assessments, and concluded the inspection without escalation. The state took no further action. By 1975, the site was no longer receiving assigned clergy. The official reason provided was a shift in Castellan strategy favoring urban missions. However, a memo issued in January of that year from a regional coordinator indicates concern over long-term inconsistencies in clerical tracking and compliance reporting. The memo concludes with the phrase, "to remain internal until resolved." No resolution appears in subsequent files. Throughout its operation, the Chapel of the Hidden Cross never faced formal investigation. The Archdiocese cited confidentiality agreements and doctrinal privacy when questioned. Most references to the site ceased after 1976. A brief note in the Order of St. Castulus's 1977 General Meeting Minutes refers to the full closure of Northern Holdings with no further elaboration. Today, public access to the site is restricted. It sits on privately held land, unmarked by signage, accessible only by permit. Satellite imagery shows most of the outer structures intact, though roof degradation suggests long-term vacancy. Former diocesan staff, when contacted in later years, offered few details. Most claimed not to recall the chapel's precise function. A few admitted to remembering its name but declined to comment further. In the spring of 1960, a letter arrived at the administrative office of St. Helena Seminary in Colorado Springs. It bore the seal of the Order of St. Castulus and carried instructions concerning a recent graduate, Father René Calder. The letter noted that Calder had completed his novitiate and was being assigned to a rural retreat in northern New Mexico for a period of spiritual focus and extended clerical orientation. No location was provided. The seminary administrator at the time, Father Millen, added a private remark in the margin of the seminary's outgoing placement log. Not common, no forwarding address, no public bulletin. By late autumn, Calder had ceased writing to his instructors. A second letter, dated October 17th, arrived without a return address. It contained only a note of appreciation for the seminary's formation and a statement of readiness to embrace permanent service without interruption. The tone was unusually formal and devoid of personal detail. Father Millen filed it under a temporary holding category labeled Awaiting Assignment Confirmation. The file was closed 6 months later, with no reply to follow-up inquiries. Over the next 3 years, at least 5 additional former seminarians from the same class cohort were routed to the same unnamed retreat. Each followed a similar pattern: an initial note of arrival, 1 additional letter within a few months, then silence. Father Millen wrote a confidential memo in 1964 expressing concern over the lack of contact from Castellan placements. He submitted the memo to the Regional Directorate of Clerical Assignments. The communication was acknowledged, but never addressed directly. Records from the Order's internal registry indicate that each of the above individuals was marked as successfully transitioned. This status was typically reserved for those reassigned to foreign missions or cloistered service. However, in the broader archive of Castellan deployments, no such posts exist for the individuals named. Later, cross-checking revealed that no parish or diocese ever recorded any of them in active ministry following their assignment to the New Mexico facility. Administrative activity from the Chapel of the Hidden Cross remained unusually sparse. Financial records show near-identical expenditures across multiple quarters, with minimal variance. Expense reports often included vague descriptions such as internal provisions or clerical necessities, with no attached invoices. The facility appeared to maintain operations with fixed annual funding, adjusted only once between 1953 and 1972. No seasonal fluctuations, no major repairs, and no capital expansions are recorded despite the presumed residential turnover. 2 years before its eventual closure, a clerical housing coordinator based in Santa Fe received an inquiry from a mother attempting to locate her son, a former deacon assigned to retreat duties in early 1969. She claimed that her letters had been returned unopened. The coordinator responded with a formal letter indicating that no active assignments were being held in the area and that further communication should be routed through the Office of Ordained Records. That office, however, held no active listing for her son. Between 1955 and 1970, a total of 4 rural mail carriers rotated through service routes that included the road adjacent to the Hidden Cross property. Interviews with surviving carriers revealed few interactions with the residents. One carrier recalled being instructed to leave mail in a locked drop box mounted near the main road. Packages were never accepted, and signature deliveries were refused. The box was emptied regularly, but no outgoing mail was ever observed. Archival documentation, preserved by a maintenance supplier in Taos, includes 2 purchase receipts from 1962 and 1967 for cleaning supplies and bulk candles. The name on both invoices reads House of St. Castulus, Central Compound, with no specific recipient. Delivery instructions requested drop-off at main access road entry, and both invoices were paid in advance. When the supplier requested a point of contact for future orders, no reply was received. In the broader clerical system, periodic assessments were standard. Each diocesan facility underwent visitations every 3 to 5 years. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross, however, recorded only one such visitation. A 1958 entry labeled Observational Review completed. No accompanying report has ever been found. In 1971, an administrative assistant from the Office of Retreat Oversight noted in a margin comment, SCC, no recent assessment, recent, possibly removed from rotation. An early reference to internal communication limits appears in a restricted memorandum from 1963 issued by the Castellan General Administration. The memo advised retreat supervisors to limit non-essential correspondence with external contacts and to adhere to silence guidelines regarding personnel movement. The document cites spiritual cohesion and uninterrupted focus as the guiding reasons. While intended as general policy, the language aligns closely with conditions described by former diocesan employees who worked peripherally with the Hidden Cross. Father Roland Chevalier, once stationed at a nearby teaching parish, recalled in an oral history session in 1982 that visiting clergy from the chapel were extremely rare and almost ceremonial. He recounted one instance in which a visiting Castellan priest attended a local feast day, arriving unannounced and remaining silent throughout. According to Chevalier, the man wore older vestments and spoke only once, offering a generic blessing. He looked like he had not been outside for years, Chevalier noted. Routine clerical census data, conducted every 5 years at the national level, consistently showed discrepancies in Castellan-affiliated personnel counts. The 1965 census, for instance, listed 14 more Castellan priests than were accounted for by assignment locations. The discrepancy was flagged, but ultimately labeled as a probable clerical error. Later audits revealed similar anomalies, all linked to northern New Mexico entries. In a report filed by the Archival Practices Committee in 1970, one section outlined challenges in locating full histories for priests who had undergone extended retreats. The report notes, certain facilities appear to maintain non-standard archival practices or omit final status updates. Though the chapel was not named, committee notes list several file codes that match those previously tied to the Hidden Cross. A recurring issue among administrative staff assigned to regional placement centers was the inconsistency of re-entry documentation. Priests typically returned from retreats with placement evaluations, health clearances, and letters of recommendation. For the Hidden Cross cases, return documentation was either incomplete or absent. One placement officer commented in a 1973 summary that files for SCC origin clergy lack exit packets. No formal complaints were lodged by the Order of St. Castellus during the active years of the chapel. All reporting remained internal, with minimal interface with external bodies. When diocesan inquiries occasionally arose regarding the status of a priest believed to be at the chapel, responses followed a template format. Individual is currently fulfilling obligations under discretion of assigned house. No external interaction is required. The phrase "under discretion of assigned house" appears in at least 13 known responses from 1956 to 1971. Subtle signs of procedural isolation began to emerge in late administrative correspondence. A 1972 circular distributed to all clerical housing coordinators included new language regarding long-term assignments. It instructed coordinators to verify continuity of residence and maintain accurate departure logs. The circular makes indirect reference to recent errors in tracking remote facility occupants. Internal response memos reveal confusion among staff over which facilities were considered remote, and no clarification was ever issued. By the early 1970s, fewer new assignments were being routed to the chapel. Notes in the Castellan Seminary dispatch logs for 1971 and 1972 show only 2 names linked to the facility. Both individuals were marked in transition, with no further notation. This final tapering of assignments, paired with silent file closures, marked the final phase before the facility's operational silence. In 1973, a clerical logistics assistant assigned to the diocesan hub in Las Cruces was instructed to consolidate historical records from smaller religious sites that had recently undergone administrative reassignment or closure. Among the holdings transferred to the Las Cruces facility were 5 crates marked only with the initials SCC and numerical labels. These crates were delivered without inventory sheets. When opened, they revealed bundled files, black-bound ledgers, and handwritten rosters, each bearing the distinctive seal of the Order of St. Castellus. One crate contained a series of internal directories. Most entries followed a rigid structure: arrival date, spiritual status, classification code, and a final notation, either reassigned, withdrawn, or closed. Among hundreds of names spanning 2 decades, 26 records listed only "file sealed." Unlike others, these lacked any follow-up status, correspondence references, or cross-indexing. A handwritten instruction taped to the inside cover of the volume read, "Do not separate. Maintain sequential integrity, verified by superior." The assistant noted that several records in these volumes did not align with existing diocesan archives. In particular, individuals marked as having departed for reassignment had no correlating files in receiving institutions. When this discrepancy was reported to the administrative coordinator, the reply came in the form of a typewritten directive. No corrective action required. Maintain as archived, not active. Reference inquiries to source order only. That same year, a seminarian conducting research for a thesis on monastic architecture requested access to historic floor plans for remote Castellan sites. His project aimed to compare design trends across enclosed communities. He was granted temporary access to a collection labeled Northern Formations, which included diagrams from the Chapel of the Hidden Cross. Among these was a detailed blueprint dated 1952, showing not only residential quarters and worship spaces, but also a marked area labeled Internal Rotation Corridor, Restricted. None of the other Castellan facilities included similar features. Notes scrawled in the margins of the blueprint included calculations of square footage and 2 references to ventilation sequences. When the seminarian requested clarification on the use of the restricted corridor, his inquiry was redirected to the archivist, who responded that no commentary was available on former operational specifics. The blueprint was later withdrawn from the accessible archive without notice. That summer, a retired priest from Santa Fe submitted a written statement to a clerical history committee, providing reflections on his interactions with remote institutions. In his testimony, he mentioned that during a regional coordination meeting in 1967, he had encountered a pair of priests recently assigned to what they only referred to as the house beyond Talus Bend. According to his notes, both men declined to specify the nature of their assignments, offering instead brief references to adjustment duties and administrative enclosure. One left the room during the conversation. The Santa Fe committee filed the statement without formal inquiry. However, the language used in the deposition prompted internal discussion. One member raised the question of why none of the priests formerly placed at that site ever participated in reassignment reviews. Another noted that the facility's lack of recorded resignations was statistically inconsistent with every other comparable retreat institution. Attempts to validate final placements through broader clerical records led to additional complications. A consultant hired to digitize personnel files from the 1950s and 1960s encountered repeated entries that terminated abruptly after assignments to the Chapel of the Hidden Cross. Unlike typical files, which transitioned into new posts or concluded with retirement records, these ended without exit documentation. When queried, the data supervisor simply recorded the files as incomplete due to procedural deviation. In an interdepartmental memo circulated in January 1974, senior administrative staff noted that the forthcoming restructuring of rural religious holdings would require careful attention to the status of historic monastic closures. A subsection titled Irregular Facilities contained a single bullet. SCC, document, seal, retain, no open correspondence. Refer all external queries to designated legal office. The order to seal the files was signed by a Castellan superior who retired later that year. Following the chapel's quiet withdrawal from active use, satellite records show no visible alteration to the site for over a decade. A 1982 aerial survey conducted for forestry mapping purposes revealed that the compound buildings remained physically undisturbed. Pathways were overgrown but unbroken. Roof lines showed signs of aging, but exterior walls were intact. The central cloister garden appeared unmaintained, though not repurposed. A land use researcher who reviewed the satellite data noted the absence of any vehicle paths leading to or from the chapel. He remarked in a published abstract that the compound preserved environmental stasis inconsistent with standard long-term habitation patterns. The chapel's layout had remained unchanged since the final construction noted in the 1960s. No additional utilities had been installed, and no evidence of residential updates appeared in any data reviewed. That same year, a private academic inquiry into regional religious retreat history produced a paper referencing institutional silence as a recurring motif in certain isolated clerical orders. The paper's author, a doctoral candidate specializing in religious infrastructure, devoted one section to the Order of St. Castulus. While avoiding specific names, the text noted that a subset of Castellan properties operated with minimal clerical traceability and left behind only partial documentation, some of which was later redacted. The author interviewed several individuals affiliated with mid-century clerical administration. One former archivist mentioned a location that required special handling and described its files as being tagged for internal containment. Another source, a former transportation coordinator, recalled instructions to avoid direct contact when servicing North Sector compounds, instead leaving all materials at perimeter delivery zones. Neither source identified the location by name, but each referenced clerical procedures, matching those observed at the Chapel of the Hidden Cross. By 1984, when a private religious journal published an overview of defunct seminaries in the American Southwest, the Chapel of the Hidden Cross was described only briefly as decommissioned with honor, functionally redundant by evolving clerical standards. The accompanying entry listed no former occupants, no founding cleric, and no closing date. It was the shortest entry in the journal's appendix. In 1987, a civil survey team reviewing historic land easements encountered the old chapel boundary. Permission was requested to document the site's exterior as part of a broader study. The request was declined by the property custodian, who cited ongoing custodial obligations. When the survey team pressed for clarification, they were referred to a legal contact representing the Order of St. Castulus. No access was granted. The chapel's absence from subsequent records has since become a point of reference for researchers studying clerical operational discretion. In later academic literature, it is sometimes cited as a case study in administrative opacity, particularly in discussions surrounding record-keeping autonomy within self-regulating religious structures. Yet no definitive statement has ever been issued by the Order regarding the full scope of the chapel's purpose or the status of its residents. Despite the lack of open disclosure, fragments of its legacy persist in unlinked archival fragments, travel requests lacking destination names, personnel entries with unclosed dates, correspondence marked interior use only. Together, these signals form a pattern, one never officially acknowledged but repeatedly encountered by those tracing the pathways of institutions designed to function in silence. In 1991, a university-funded project known as the Western Clerical History Initiative began digitizing archived records from underdocumented religious institutions across the southwestern United States. The team, led by a faculty archivist from a state university, obtained access to a series of unopened diocesan cartons stored in a secondary warehouse leased by the Archdiocese of Las Cruces. Among these was a small collection labeled Retreat Registers, SCC. The designation caught the attention of a graduate researcher due to its unusual formatting. The researcher, tasked with cataloging intake logs from the 1950s and 1960s, discovered a bound ledger featuring a non-standard intake format. Each page included an assigned ID code, arrival date, initials rather than full names, and a section titled Clerical Review Outcome. While most pages concluded with a statement such as cleared for rotation or assigned to internal renewal, 26 entries ended with a single phrase, without continuation. The handwriting varied slightly from line to line, but the ink tone and spacing suggested the ledger had been updated regularly. The graduate team flagged the ledger as anomalous. Though the Western Clerical History Initiative was not designed to initiate investigations, its internal protocol required the reporting of discrepancies where clerical status could not be cross-verified. A summary memo was submitted to the university's Historical Advisory Committee. The response was neutral, directing the team to continue digitization but to refrain from interpretive analysis. The ledger was scanned, stored in the project database, and the physical copy returned to archival storage. 3 months later, while reviewing peripheral data sets related to transportation logistics for isolated clerical sites, another researcher encountered microfilm from a 1966 shipment log. It originated from a regional Castellan administrative hub and included supply transfers marked for SCC. One entry referenced a delivery marked, "No unload required, hold perimeter." The delivery date matched one of the "without continuation" entries in the intake ledger. No other details were listed, and the source facility's name had been abbreviated. As part of its standard procedure, the research initiative published an annual summary of atypical entries. The hidden cross materials were listed in the appendix, along with a brief notation. Archival ledger lacks reassignment confirmation for multiple entries. No clerical correlation identified. Status undetermined. That summary caught the attention of a retired clerical administrator based in Santa Fe, who had been loosely affiliated with diocesan logistics in the early 1970s. He contacted the project coordinator and requested access to the hidden cross materials. In a series of phone calls, he described having encountered sealed files from that facility decades earlier. When asked to elaborate, he declined to provide written statements, but confirmed the general pattern observed by the research team. He noted that internal reviews from that period had quietly redirected clerical inquiries regarding certain individuals. "You didn't follow up," he said. "That was the structure." The project team, now aware of the possible implications, submitted a second memo, this time directly to the University Ethics Committee, requesting permission to cross-reference the ledger data with public ordination records. The request was approved under academic transparency provisions. Over the next 6 weeks, the team compiled a database of known ordinations from the Castellan Seminary during the relevant decades. Of the 26 without continuation entries, 22 matched ordination records for priests whose careers ended abruptly after their hidden cross assignments. None of the 22 had recorded reassignments, resignations, or laicizations. In most cases, their final notation simply read, "Entered retreat, status not updated." One individual, identified by initials in the intake log as ALF, had previously served as an assistant rector at a teaching seminary. His personnel file ended on the exact date of his SCC intake. All correspondence regarding him was marked, "Returned unopened." The research team submitted its findings to the Castellan Order's historical liaison. A response arrived 2 weeks later, brief and formal. The liaison thanked the team for its commitment to historical accuracy and confirmed that certain documents from the mid-20th century remain protected under internal archival confidentiality guidelines. The response closed with a statement, "No further clarifications will be provided at this time." One researcher, dissatisfied with the order's refusal to clarify the outcome of the 26 individuals, contacted a legal historian specializing in religious institutional transparency. Through a chain of academic contacts, the historian gained access to interdiocesan memos from the early 1970s. Among them was a folder titled Northern Clerical Realignments, Closed Sites. One sheet inside listed facility codes, dates of closure, and notes. The line for SCC read, "Non-reintegrated entries archived, no forward placements, hold status." This phrasing, unfamiliar to most modern clerical administrators, prompted a review of policy manuals from the time. A 1954 Castellan procedural handbook, held at a private religious library, included a section titled Post-Retreat Status Conditions. Among the listed outcomes was a designation marked non-reintegrable, retain internal classification. The criteria for this status were not elaborated, but it indicated that certain individuals would remain indefinitely outside standard clerical tracking. As the project neared the end of its funding cycle, the team published a final internal review. Though carefully worded, the report noted a pattern of unresolved clerical transitions at a single facility over multiple years, and recommended that further archival access be granted to determine scope and policy consistency. The university did not authorize an extension. The review remains stored in the digital appendix of the project's final archive, accessible to researchers upon request. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross was never publicly named in diocesan publications. Its omission from registries and bulletins, once attributed to its seclusion, now appeared deliberate. The intake records, sealed status notations, and lack of reintegration combined to create a profile inconsistent with any known clerical facility in the region. Where other retreat centers documented spiritual outcomes, reassignment paths, or closure rationales, the Hidden Cross retained only brief notations and directive language discouraging inquiry. One of the last recorded communications referencing the site came in 1976, in a sealed advisory sent from the Castellan Administrative Board to 3 diocesan coordination offices. It stated, "All prior files connected to the facility located east of Talus Bend are to remain archived under internal retention protocol. No personnel queries are to be routed without expressed authorization. The matter is not to be revisited under routine archival reviews." The advisory concluded with a reaffirmation of procedural discretion. For decades, these materials remained in isolation. Only through the layered efforts of academic researchers, policy analysts, and former administrators did the pattern emerge. The names of those who entered, the absence of those who returned, and the directives to avoid review formed a closed system, one designed not to erase but to restrict. The Order's own documentation, when cross-referenced, confirms the intake. The exits, however, remain undocumented. In the clerical landscape of mid-century America, retreats were commonplace. They offered structure, discipline, and doctrinal reinforcement. But the Chapel of the Hidden Cross did not follow those rhythms. Its files contain no pastoral recommendations, no evaluations, and no recorded departures. What they contain instead are single entries, closed annotations, and silence. In late 1992, a second-level inquiry into dormant institutional properties was conducted by a consortium of academic and municipal agencies in New Mexico. Though the focus was on land stewardship and preservation zoning, a list of defunct facilities was cross-referenced against state tax archives. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross appeared under a holding name registered in 1949 as Castellan Central Site, C. It had never filed for tax exemption. The omission was identified by a clerical researcher reviewing exemption consistency across religious holdings. He flagged the entry due to its age and the absence of updates or corresponding facility reports. Most sites of similar size had at least one recorded filing for utility access, repair grants, or compliance documentation. This location had none. A subsequent check of utility service records confirmed no registered electric, gas, or water changes from 1953 through 1972. Satellite inspection data aligned with those findings, indicating no infrastructure modifications or maintenance activity consistent with modern occupancy standards. The data analyst's summary referred to the site as operationally static. Following the report, a representative from the State Historical Office contacted the Castellan Order to request historical clarification. The request was acknowledged but deferred. A written reply arrived 34 days later, confirming the property had been removed from active service and advising that all historical queries be routed through the Order's Central Archive in Chicago. No further information was offered. The Historical Office placed the site on an inactive custodial list, a designation used for religious properties whose documentation is incomplete but whose ownership remains intact. This status does not trigger any formal investigation or public disclosure. The facility remained physically undisturbed. In 1994, a graduate student specializing in institutional record-keeping practices encountered the Hidden Cross designation while reviewing canonical compliance across closed facilities. She identified discrepancies in how retreat facilities had historically documented long-term assignments. Most sites maintained periodic assessments and updates. The Hidden Cross retained only intake ledgers and notations without follow-through. The student attempted to trace one of the closed file names using initials matched against known ordination rosters. She located a matching entry in a 1956 seminary graduation list, a man ordained under the Castellan system, assigned to northern New Mexico, then never recorded again. The original seminary file showed his final status as assigned pending retreat resolution. No terminal notation appeared. She compiled 9 additional examples, all following a near-identical pattern. Each man had completed seminary formation, received minor assignments or teaching posts, then been routed to SCC. None had subsequent placement history. She submitted the findings to her program director, who reviewed the data but advised no further action, citing that archival scope was limited to documentation, not policy oversight. That same year, a diocesan transition manager in Albuquerque, reviewing archived correspondence, found a letter dated 1969 that had been misfiled under a defunct outreach program. The letter, written by a cleric stationed briefly near Talus Bend, mentioned an unexpected visit from Central Supervision regarding SCC. It detailed a meeting in which clerical supervision arrived unannounced, spent 3 days at the chapel compound, then departed without formal reporting. The letter noted a request that nearby clergy refrain from contacting the site during that time. The transition manager filed the letter under supplemental correspondence, but flagged the mention of supervisory review. In a marginal note, she added, "Was this the final audit?" No other documentation referenced any supervisory visits or audits to the site after that year. Around the same period, a small group of independent religious historians compiled a comparative analysis of clerical autonomy in mid-century monastic retreats. One of the contributors, a former archivist, included the Chapel of the Hidden Cross in an internal case study. The document, never formally published, suggested that SCC represents a structural outlier in both retention methods and closure opacity. The report hypothesized that a mechanism had been developed to redirect clerics who fell outside certain administrative pathways. Though no specific language confirmed such a mechanism, the patterns in intake data, file closures, and communication restrictions supported the possibility. The report concluded that functional silence rather than secrecy appears to have been the operational goal. In 1996, a private collection of correspondence donated by a retired Castellan secretary was processed by a religious studies archive. Among the items were 5 carbon-copied memos dated between 1963 and 1971, each marked with the initials SCC Dear. They were internal updates from a supervising cleric at the Chapel of the Hidden Cross to regional administrative offices. The memos did not contain names. Instead, they listed numbers, dates of arrival, and the phrase, "pending further interior discernment." One memo included the notation, "No external clearance required, spiritual housing confirmed." Another stated, "File retention confirmed, remain under internal observation." The memos were written in a standardized tone, devoid of any subjective commentary. The language suggested that no feedback or inquiry was expected in return. When the archive contacted the order to confirm provenance, the response stated only that the documents reflected historic internal practice during periods of procedural standardization. No additional information was given. By 1998, a quiet consensus had formed among several researchers. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross had functioned under protocols that precluded conventional administrative follow-up. These protocols were not documented in public clerical guidelines, nor were they discussed in official diocesan histories. Yet the consistency of incomplete files, sealed notations, and redirected correspondence left little ambiguity. In a final archival summary prepared before the facility's designation was formally retired, the following conclusions were entered. The site received assigned clerics between 1952 and 1972. At least 26 individuals were routed there with no subsequent placement record. All clerical files from the facility remain sealed or closed by internal order. No known cleric re-entered public ministry following residence at the site. This summary, stored in a restricted access collection, is the last official notation referencing the Chapel of the Hidden Cross. Its property status remains unchanged, with no new filings or applications. The perimeter fencing visible in satellite imagery shows signs of weathering, but no evidence of removal. To date, the order has issued no public statement about the function of the site or the status of its former residents. Researchers granted limited archival access describe the documentation as orderly, sparse and final. There are no marginal notes, no unsigned pages, and no conflicting records. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross exists in record only by way of entry. Its final designations, uniformly sealed, remain undisturbed. The absence of departure logs, reassignment files, or resignation entries suggests not an oversight, but a structural decision. In 2002, a preservation initiative funded through the State Historical Commission launched an effort to document unregistered religious properties in northern New Mexico. The focus was architectural, not institutional, yet the team encountered a listing anomaly near a former clerical road used intermittently in mid-century infrastructure surveys. The road led to a parcel marked inactive religious holdings, with no builder or parish listed in county files. The lead researcher submitted a request for visual access under the Historic Structures exemption. The request was formally denied. A second appeal, citing public heritage protocols, yielded a brief reply from the land's legal custodian. No consent for on-site visitation. Ownership remains intact. The structure is preserved in accordance with private directives. The team did not press further. The parcel was entered into the registry as Restricted Access Religious Site, Documentation Incomplete. No photographs were included. In satellite records, the location appeared unchanged since the last formal review. Roof lines remained consistent, no demolition had occurred, and no nearby development had disturbed the boundary. Academic attention to the site began to wane after 2005. Institutional memory faded as clerical staff retired and records aged beyond routine access cycles. A handful of archivists continued to track personnel anomalies, but references to SCC no longer surfaced in diocesan audits or annual reports. The names tied to the site's history, though preserved in digitized form, were disconnected from living narrative. In 2009, a collection of private papers belonging to a former assistant archivist was donated to a university in Santa Fe. Among the materials was a series of personal logs spanning several decades. One entry, dated June 1971, described an internal filing process involving documents from Northern Consolidation. The writer noted that several folders contained only index cards with two-letter initials and a short numeric code. Each was stamped with the Castellan seal. The entry included a comment on the deliberate minimalism of the materials, not absence by error, but design. Someone intended this to remain administrative, not historical. The logs were not official reports. They were handwritten reflections stored in a private notebook. Still, the detail and consistency suggested proximity to the process. That same year, a doctoral student researching ecclesiastical land use patterns identified the Hidden Cross site as part of a now dormant alignment of Castellan holdings. While analyzing archival maps, he discovered that 5 former facilities, once linked by quarterly correspondence routes, each recorded a final dispatch to SCC within 6 months of its operational closure. The language of the dispatches was formulaic. Each acknowledged receipt of transfer summary and confirmed the finality of closure record. One site, located near Socorro, included a marginal note in its last outgoing message: "No feedback requested, protocol observed." The original communication from SCC was not preserved, only the reply. Attempts to locate the Chapel of the Hidden Cross within national religious structure databases proved unproductive. Though the property remained physically intact, its absence from formal registries rendered it inaccessible through standard channels. Even specialized clerical facility directories, maintained by legacy religious orders, made no mention of the name. By 2011, public records listed the site under a general holding trust administered through a Denver-based custodial office. The managing entity, when contacted by journalists conducting research for a regional history feature, confirmed only that the property remained under permanent internal oversight. No interviews were granted and no further documentation was released. Among researchers focused on the administrative practices of mid-century clerical institutions, the Chapel of the Hidden Cross emerged occasionally as a case reference. Academic panels mentioned it in discussions of incomplete transfer protocols and the boundaries of internal documentation ethics. Yet the topic rarely advanced beyond quiet citations and speculative footnotes. One historian noted during a 2012 symposium that certain facilities maintained such complete silence that they effectively erased their own institutional echo. The remark, made without direct reference, matched descriptors used in earlier correspondence about SCC, rotational opacity, document finality, and administrative isolation. The broader narrative of the 26 unnamed files remained unchanged. No relatives stepped forward. No formal inquiries were filed by surviving colleagues. The clerics had entered a system that required no external closure. Their intake was verified, their departure never marked. Each became part of a ledger that recorded only arrival and silence. In a limited archival note preserved by the Order of St. Castulus, a phrase appears in reference to retreat sites requiring restricted oversight. The note, part of an internal procedural summary from 1970, lists 3 classification levels for retreat documentation. The final category, marked Internal Discretionary Conclusion, was reserved for cases involving no re-entry, no evaluation, and no record sharing. The file does not explain the criteria for this classification. No external review was ever commissioned. Diocesan leadership from the era did not issue statements or place the chapel on public closure lists. Parish newsletters, even those tracking personnel movements, made no mention of reassignment from the site. The Castellan Order's published annual reports between 1953 and 1972 do not contain the words Hidden Cross or SCC. Efforts to reconstruct the lived experience of clerics assigned there rely solely on their entry profiles. These often included short biographical details, ordination dates, and preliminary placements. Yet once recorded at the chapel, each profile ends. There are no evaluations, no testimonials, no references to service completion. In the absence of personal documents, researchers reviewed the Order's general training materials. These reveal standardized procedures for retreat preparation, spiritual directives, and enclosure periods. However, they make no provision for indefinite placement without reassignment. The Hidden Cross model, whatever its intended purpose, diverged from established retreat structure. Some clerical historians have described the site's procedural silence as formally complete. This designation reflects the paradox of total record-keeping without continuity, a system built to conclude without narrative. The files exist intact and verified, yet offer no trajectory beyond intake. The absence of formal critique may be due in part to the completeness of the administrative materials that do exist. Nothing appears falsified. No cross-referenced names were altered. Dates, locations, and initials align across multiple repositories. The Order did not conceal information, it restricted function. Where most clerical facilities generated output, homilies, assignments, letters, reflections, the Chapel of the Hidden Cross issued only intake confirmations and eventual archival seals. The system did not produce controversy. It produced conclusions without response. The surrounding area, though sparsely populated, retains evidence of mid-century routes used for transport and clerical visitation. Old parish roads show faint impressions of tire paths leading north from known seminary outposts. Waypoints listed in historic courier logs place SCC within 2 hours of former Castellan residences. Yet, even among those who served nearby, the name carries no institutional familiarity. Former clergy interviewed decades later recall only rumors, a place for interior correction or deep assignment. The tone was always neutral, never disparaging but always final. No signs remain outside the chapel, no entry markers, no posted directories. Photographs from the early 1970s show a single gate with a locked chain and a plain wooden post beside it. There is no external plaque, no inscribed dedication. The road leading in has narrowed from disuse, overtaken by surrounding brush. Today, the property continues under private custodial care. Requests for scholarly access are routinely declined. Legal ownership remains unchanged. The facility itself, never reassigned or sold, sits undisturbed. Its designation in archival references remains closed. In 2013, an internal audit commissioned by a university theology department included a section titled Non-Operational Ecclesiastical Holdings, Documentation Integrity. The audit reviewed a sample of inactive sites across several states, comparing file retention practices, closure transparency, and reassignment confirmations. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross was cited twice, each time under the heading No Documentation Beyond Intake. The auditors noted the completeness of the intake ledgers and the apparent deliberate finality of those entries. Each file reviewed showed consistency in arrival verification, but no signs of departure or continuation. The conclusion stated only, retreat status confirmed, archival end noted. The university did not pursue additional investigation. The audit, though thorough, was framed as an academic exercise. Recommendations were limited to standardizing historical summaries across diocesan archives. No outreach was made to the Order of St. Castulus. In 2014, a historian working independently compiled a comparative study of ecclesiastical assignments that terminated without follow-up. His methodology included analyzing personnel transitions across known retreat facilities. Most showed documented exit points. Only one facility, the Hidden Cross, showed a cluster of entries with no known completion. He published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal noting structural silence as an institutional tool. The Hidden Cross served as a primary example, though mentioned only by code. The paper avoided speculative language, focusing instead on administrative outcomes. In 2016, a small regional exhibit on monastic life featured a panel dedicated to enclosed religious spaces. One section referenced lesser-known retreat facilities that had contributed to the clerical landscape without maintaining long-term visibility. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross was listed without elaboration, only a footnote. Private facility, status inactive, records sealed. The panel included a reproduction of a property outline traced from historic maps. A visitor to the exhibit later contacted the university curators, claiming to have worked as a field assistant for a land assessment firm in the 1980s. He recalled being stationed near the property for 2 weeks during dry season access checks. According to his account, all perimeters were intact, and a small crew handled brush clearance at the property's edge. He never entered the structure, nor interacted with anyone inside. He remembered a posted notice at the time affixed to the fence reading, "Clerical property under custodial management, no entry without order." The sign had no emblem, only plain lettering. The university added his statement to their supplementary file, noting that it was anecdotal and did not affect the archival status of the location. No other accounts from that period surfaced. By 2017, inquiries into clerical file retention policies had shifted toward digital compliance and international transparency standards. Older facilities such as the Hidden Cross remained exceptions. Because the site had never undergone open reassessment, it was excluded from most policy discussions. In 2019, a consortium of archivists launched a digital recovery project for mid-century clerical records. During data compilation, they encountered a list of pending locations for review. The Hidden Cross appeared again, marked as already processed, do not revisit. The phrase appeared in several internal project memos. It matched earlier Castellan notations from retired administrative files. No digital images of the interior have ever been published. Photographic documentation, if it exists, remains restricted. Public imagery is limited to satellite views and one aerial reconnaissance photo taken in 1974. That image, preserved in a transportation archive, shows the chapel's distinct layout, a central structure with 2 flanking wings and a separate perimeter corridor. No identifying symbols are visible in the photo. The image shows enclosed grounds with no visible vehicles, signage, or external lighting. Ground texture indicates limited human traffic. The structure appears intact, with no signs of structural alteration. One archivist reviewing the image in 2020 noted that the chapel's orientation and layout reflected a design principle known as interior reserve, intended for minimal outward interaction. Such structures emphasized internal circulation and reduced perimeter permeability. This design element aligned with Castellan architectural norms for extended enclosures. In 2021, A graduate researcher gained temporary access to a limited set of administrative documents referencing mid-century retreat closures. The collection, held in off-site diocesan storage, included routine closure memos, decommissioning inventories, and custodial transfer agreements. The Hidden Cross was the only facility without a closure memo. Its folder contained only a single document, a verification of property custodianship dated June 1975, signed by a regional clerical officer. The document made no reference to operational status, only land management. No names appeared other than the officer's signature. The document bore the note, "Confirmed, retain until further directive." That phrase appears in other facility files, usually when closures were pending legal finalization. In the case of the Hidden Cross, no subsequent directive was ever located. In 2022, an oral history project collecting testimony from elderly clergy included an interview with a retired logistics coordinator. When asked about remote facility operations, he referenced a compound east of Talus Bend where you didn't deliver to the door. Instead, he described a fixed routine: supplies dropped at a gate, acknowledgement never given, and records signed off remotely. He did not name the facility, but his description matched earlier accounts. He remarked, "It wasn't hidden. It just wasn't interacted with. Everything was scheduled, nothing casual." He confirmed that the property received assignments, but could not recall any individual being reassigned afterward. The interview was archived under General Operations Commentary. No follow-up was conducted. The coordinator passed away 6 months later. The last documented transaction involving the Hidden Cross appeared in a 2023 property tax review. The parcel was recertified as religious use land with restricted public access. The notation indicated continued ownership by the same custodial trust. No application was made for reassignment, development, or demolition. The structure remains registered as intact. The grounds, visible only from high-altitude imaging, show no alterations. Paths leading to the perimeter appear unused. Seasonal shifts suggest no ongoing landscape maintenance. The institution that once occupied the space no longer participates in any public-facing clerical network. It is not mentioned in contemporary Castellan communications, and no regional office includes it in legacy reports. Yet its designation endures through residual documentation, land records, sealed intake files, restricted archival codes. There is no plaque, no commemorative listing, no indexed history. Only the intake logs confirm presence. Only the seals confirm finality. The names, reduced to initials, remain catalogued but unreachable. The Chapel of the Hidden Cross, active for 20 years, left no sermons, no programs, and no published notices. It recorded only who entered. If this story impacted you, if you stayed until the end, it's because you feel these hidden truths also need to be exposed. So leave in the comments the city you're watching from. This way we can see how far these stories are reaching. And subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering. This story is fictional. All names have been edited to protect the source. This video is for entertainment purposes only. But here's a disclaimer. It's based on historical facts.